To my immediate right, we have the Director General of the OECS Commission, Dr. Didicus Jules. I also have with me colleague ministers, Minister Ryan from Montserrat, Minister Gloria Shillingford from Dominica, Mr. Michael Brown from Antigua, and Minister Jerome Roberts from Anguilla. And we've had 2 days of discussion during this first meeting of Council of Ministers of Education of the OECS. And we would like to present to you the key decisions that were taken at this meeting. One of the very first issues for us in the OECS is the implementation of the OECS Education Sector Strategy 2012-2021. The ministers have committed to continue adopting a collaborative approach to resolving common problems facing the education system, support and accelerate the process of aligning their national education plans with the regional education strategy. And I can say for St. Lucia, with the new plan that we're putting together, we're making a very definite effort and deliberate effort to do exactly this. The ministers will show support for an accelerated process of aligning, as I said, the national education plans with the regional education strategy, committed to secure budget support for OECS initiatives at the national level. The ministers have agreed to facilitate the exchange of technical expertise among ministries of education in the OECS. A second issue that came out of this meeting was enhancing policy, planning and institutional frameworks for child rights. So ministers have agreed that they'll promote the linkages within the social development sector to ensure that teachers are trained in the use of child abuse reporting protocols, strengthen teachers' capacity to use positive behavioral management strategies for you to abolish the use of corporal punishment in schools. It's a very much a hot debated issue in St. Lucia at the moment, and therefore St. Lucia would love to really champion that particular point, so that we can at least give teachers a different avenue. Early childhood development is critical for us because it has been said that between the ages 0 to 3, the most fundamental developmental stages of a child's educational life, and ministers have agreed to facilitate the development of an annual early childhood development plan. And these plans will include policy implementation with the required budget within fiscal and human resource realities. A fourth point that comes out here is one on assessment, CXC's work on behalf of the governments. We have agreed that the individual member states would seek to adopt the Caribbean, the CCSLC, and the CPA as deemed necessary and appropriate for national conditions. In particular, the CPA is a very important issue in terms of assessment. The OECS, as you would appreciate, has moved to almost full movement of persons within our space. And the CPA will become very critical because as parents move, as people move, they move with their children, and that will be a lot easier for schools to assess where a particular child is at. A fifth point for us in our discussion is ICT in education. And the ministers have agreed to explore the availability of more cost-effective e-learning materials, including open educational resources. I need to say that, of course, the theme for the whole conference was enhancing, or we're really trying to transform education in the OECS so we can embrace ICT within our classrooms and within the education system, so to ensure every child will have success in learning. The last point for us would have been on tertiary education. Ministers agreed to further explore various models for expanding tertiary education in the OECS. And one of the key things for us is we agreed to undertake a comprehensive review of current and planned arrangement of teacher education programs in the region with a view to address issues and concerns of member states. The teacher education programs in the various member states, they are the business of, it's the business of the various governments, and therefore we feel for too long that some of the teacher training programs in our space, we have not paid adequate attention to these programs, and therefore the discussion, a very heated discussion where ministers are very resolved to ensuring that we readdress the whole teacher training program in the OECS. At this time, I would like to call on Dr. Jules, who, as Director General, would present his own views on the discussions that went on for the last 2 days.
Thank you very much, Minister. Let me first of all compliment the Honorable Robert Lewis for very ably guiding this first Council of Ministers of the OECS through what was really a very productive session over the last 2 days. There were several new ministers of education who were present with us, and so they have brought a fresh vigor and enthusiasm to the work of the Council of Ministers, as well as a very strong sense of urgency. And this we welcome because, as you know, our focus in the OECS is to try a focus on action. For too long, decisions in the Caribbean have floundered, especially at regional levels, around just declarations, and what people need to see is action happening on the ground, a difference being made. In addition to that, the ministers, I think, had paid particular attention to the voices of students as expressed. For those of you who had been at the opening ceremony, the voices of students with regard to the issues of concern from a student perspective on reforms in education. And I would say that the most successful feature of this council meeting has been the frankness of the discourse that has taken place, and the self-critical nature of the interventions, where ministers, ask very probing questions on a number of issues, presentations by other regional organizations, by multilaterals. Nothing was taken for granted, and I think that is a very positive sign going forward. There was a very strong exchange of experiences and best practices. Ministers appraised each other. Some of the new initiatives, for example, Honorable Michael Brown spoke to the issue of a teachers' academy that Antigua is about to start, and ministers were impressed with this initiative to require that he keep them informed so that the possibility of participation of other OECS territories in what is essentially an Antigua initiative was mooted. Now, that is precisely the purpose of what we hope a forum like this would help to engender. Member states acting on their sovereign will, responding to their priorities, but recognizing the opportunities for other member states to participate and to share experiences, expertise, and resources. The guiding concerns for the meeting were on 3 things: performance in the education systems, on cost effectiveness, and on the issue of wider access and opportunity. Ministers were particularly concerned to ensure that in all of the plans for the education reform of the OECS and in implementing their own national plans in the context of that regional framework, that there be a consistent widening of access of opportunity to particularly disadvantaged sectors in the education system.
Janika Simon from Choice News. Thank you so much for calling this press conference. I would like to ask a few questions. The first thing is the disparity between males and females when it comes to education. In St. Lucia, I am not sure if this is a problem that's common to other OECS territories. We see or we observe that the higher you go in the education system, the less males you have successfully completing each stage. So we have a balance in the primary school. By the time you get to CXC, you have fewer males. By the time you get to tertiary level, you have even fewer males, and it goes on. Did that issue come up at all in your discussions? And if it did, what are some of the things that you think could be done to perhaps stop this loss of our males through the system?
Well, let me just say that while this was not one of the areas where we had emphasis on, but it did come up in different fashions, in that we recognize that, especially when you're discussing tertiary education, that we recognize, or even education throughout the system, that you recognize that there would be, while at the primary level, there are about equal number of girls and boys in the system. But by the time, as you said, you went on to tertiary education, you begin to see the changes. But of course, this is an area that needs to be addressed. It has been addressed in a number of fora, but I just think that it's an area that needs special attention. We've been talking about it for a while, but I don't think that we've got to taking on initiatives that will address that imbalance. Let me say, I suppose my colleague minister from Antigua may want to make a statement about it also.
I think just to, I concur completely with Dr. Lewis. Although we didn't tackle it specifically as an independent item, what we did in essence was to do a comprehensive look at the delivery of education from K to the tertiary level, tackling all areas in a comprehensive way, going all the way back towards a re-examination of the delivery of pedagogy from the pre-primary level all the way up to the tertiary level, with a special emphasis on not viewing the absence or the abundance of absence of males throughout various strata of the education process, but more embracing the fact that we as a region need to have a deeper and closer integration of technical vocational address at all levels, including looking towards revamping and the introduction from the primary school level. In that we also have to look at, especially when it comes to the tertiary avenue, a complete re-examination, which is one of the areas that we're fully agreed on, a complete re-examination on our national needs and what we've been able to identify. Not only are our concerns and our problems very similar, but the means, the mode, and the expertise in order to address them, we are also going to tap into those avenues where they're unseparated from each other, and we approach it as one solid entity, because the concerns of St. Lucia are the concerns of Anguilla, which are the concerns of Montserrat, they're all our concerns. And so it's a common approach, not just pulling out one issue, but approaching, do a systematic review and response.
My next question, you mentioned a focus on technical and vocational access. And in the opening ceremony, the featured speaker, Jasmine Verdant, actually kind of put a little pressure, saying that there was not enough access to technical programs, vocational programs. And in that regard, we actually have in St. Lucia a situation where we still have the common entrance, which kind of classifies or stratifies students based on achievement. But we still have a situation where no matter where you are in the achievement level, you still spend the same 5 years covering the same CXC syllabus, and you sit the same exam at the end, which kind of puts lower achieving students at a disadvantage sometimes. So I'm wondering, how that played out in your discussion. Were there any strategies identified to perhaps, give low achievers a little more time with the syllabus, or perhaps funnel them into more technical or vocational programs if they are in fact not, academically inclined?
Let me just say, I really want to say that I don't like the terms low achievers. I think there are so many different competencies that people have. I think what we need to do is, I think there's a wide range of subjects in the school curriculum. And if I must speak in a particular way, I need to say that schools have a lot of autonomy to at least ensuring that children get a balanced education. I mean, you expect in a school for the school to arrange for everybody to be able to be literate and to continue to do English language, a bit of literature, to develop numerical skills. You can do mathematics, social studies. But obviously, it's clear that if a child is going to take at least 5 CXCs, that schools will find, because that's what educational leaders do, that they will find ways, schools should find ways to ensure that every child can get to do certain things that will tell us that they're competent in some areas. And I think we've heard it from Dr. Jules from a CXC perspective, because there are children who are very good. That's why you notice that there are a few new KIP subjects like creative arts, I think, there are agriculture. You have different areas. So when we keep saying academic, but I want to say that everything you study, whether it has a technical aspect, there must be a mental process. So there's nothing to me in what we call low achievers and people who are not academically able. I just think is that we are able differently in that some of us have certain emphases that we spend time on, and some of us are better at certain areas than others. So I want to say that I think with the whole thrust of this meeting, the fact that we're looking at the entire system and how to look at the entire OECS education sector strategy, I think all these areas are encompassed within that plan, and it is the goal of the ministers in the respective countries to ensure that we give everybody an opportunity to learn and to show they are competent in different fields.
And Minister from Montserrat, if you could talk about whether everybody or yourself as Minister of Montserrat is satisfied that the subject offerings that CXC and CAPE offers are broad enough, wide enough to cover not just the typical grammar school subjects, but I know they and also the creative and also technical aspects. I don't know if we have any plumbing CXCs or auto mechanic CXCs. Things may have changed since 1997, but if you can address that.
Being new on the scene, from the discussions I've gathered, there are other options. I've heard discussions on the CVQs as well as discussions on the TVET program, although we did not go into too much detail on the TVET program. But what really the focus was more about how do we integrate these fully into our education systems. And again, it comes back to our individual economic needs and in terms of our resources and what we can offer based on the resources that we have in our individual states. For example, in Montserrat, we may not be able to offer the range of subjects as in a country such as St. Lucia, given the resources in teachers to deliver those training. And also in terms of the CVQ programs, there's still that discussion as to who really should be delivering these. Should it be the technical people in the field, like the plumbers being a part of it, or should it be a teacher who is training, delivering it? So it still comes back to us to decide exactly who would take forward the lead on delivering these programs. But it's very, very important because even in Montserrat, we have the same situation where individuals would have graduated through the secondary education system without developing a skill. And part of it is that we have not yet grasped on to all of the opportunities available coming from the CXC and other agencies.
Many of the discussions, although there was no particular topic on that in the council meeting, many of the discussions and the back and forth with ministers did touch on that issue. There is a recognition that education has to be a holistic thing. We need to also debunk certain myths. A lot of people talk about, you yourself mentioned it, children as being not academically inclined. In effect, there is no such thing as a child who is not academically inclined. There are different styles of learners. People learn at different rates and they have different competencies. And in fact, the challenge, everybody is capable of success, which is why the OECS education reform strategy speaks to every learner succeeding. The challenge for us in the system is how do we enable that learning to take place? And that's why the theme of this council meeting emphasize ICT, because that's where a lot of young people are at. You hear parents sometimes complaining that children don't read nowadays. they spend all their time on the computer and the iPad. Well, hello, what are they doing on the iPad? They're reading. It's not reading from a book. So we have those traditional notions of what reading is. And what we see happening with the young people is multimodal reading. They're reading on their phones, on their iPads, and so on. We do have the capability. There are the resources to take that well-rounded approach. In CXC, for example, all of the subjects have what they call parity of esteem internationally. So if you have a grade 1 in English or in physics or in a technical and vocational subject in woodwork, a 1 is a 1. It's recognized by Cambridge as equal weighting. So it's not that there is that artificial distinction. I think some of that is our own colonial inheritance, where we believe that people who can't learn with their head must learn with their hands. And in fact, TVET in this 21st century now increasingly requires a strong measure of cognitive, critical thinking, and so on. Obviously, the skills component in a technical subject is much larger than the cognitive component. And the reverse happens for an academic subject. Academics must now also embrace skills. And the acting registrar of CXC, Mr. Glenroy Cumberbatch, was here and spoke to that. He spoke to the CCSLC, which is all about developing competencies. So when you say that a child is doing well in English, for example, it can't just be that they pass an English exam. That competence must be reflected in the ability to write a letter, describe something, write a report, do a book report, and that sort of thing.
Talking about early childhood education, I am wondering whether it is an OECS goal or a stated OECS policy for universal early childhood education.
Thank you very much for your question. This is one of the topics on which we've spent quite some time deliberating during this day and a half here, because we recognize the importance of early childhood education and the fact that we ought to put a lot of emphasis on this particular subject area, because when we speak about education holistically, we have to continue to think about it from, as we say, from the cradle to the grave. And therefore, I speak, I think, holistically on behalf of the other members at the head table by saying that this is an area of emphasis and one in which we intend to pay a lot of attention to. Because it is important that we get not just the systems right, but in terms of those who want to administer the system as well, we have to pay a lot of attention in that particular area. And therefore, we speak about financial gains and what is the end result, what is the value for money, etc., as it relates to education. And we also, continue to focus on the whole aspect that education is key. And if education is key, and if we are going to really be speaking and holding this as it should be, then it means that we're going to have to spend the relevant finances to be able to equip our people to offer the requisite, training and expertise, and give them the tools that are required in order to deliver proper education to our, so that's what I would refer to as our toddlers. And that 0 to 3 year age grouping is critical in terms of the advancement of the brain and the minds of our young people. And as I said earlier, not to be repetitious, but this really has been high on the agenda in terms of our discussions. And I think we'll leave here feeling comfortable that we've been able to share with each other the ways in which we have been doing or trying to do our bit from our respective territories. And holistically, how could we now bring that together that will benefit our region? I think that is the most I would be able to say on that at this point in time. Thank you.
One of the items that you mentioned was brought up for discussion was the reduction in corporal punishment, or giving teachers skills and tools and strategies to avoid corporal punishment. And I couldn't help but note that there was actually no explicit condemnation about corporal punishment. There was no stated goal of eliminating corporal punishment in schools. I was just wondering, what's the thinking of the ministers in that regard?
Well, let's just say that in the OECS, from our information, is that Anguilla, Montserrat, I think Antigua is in the process of getting rid of corporal punishment. If you look, it's coming down the islands, right? So if you start in Anguilla and you come down, Antigua being the closest of the Leeward Islands to the Windward, any of the Windward. Well, BVI, yes, the British Virgin Islands these countries have eliminated or they banned corporal punishment. I mean, the discussion in St. Lucia has been ongoing. And you'd appreciate, as we always say, that there are a number of stakeholders who must come together to make that decision. What I would say is that it was clear from our meeting that if we give teachers different coping mechanisms, we give them ways of handling behavior, management skills, we expect that eventually they wouldn't have to resort to corporal punishment. And that is what we agreed to at the meeting. So even those who are banned, they are supportive to say, we will encourage you, we'll work with you, we'll tell you what are some of the mechanisms that you can use, some of the strategies, teacher strategies that you can use to enhance classroom management, and therefore you will eventually, if these are in place, you eventually have no need for corporal punishment. But at the moment, it is still, and there has been adoption of different, I must say, progress, especially in St. Lucia. I mean, we've moved from a position where everybody administered corporal punishment in school to now the ministry, within the Education Act, it says that the principal will give a certain, well, let us say will allow, it's the principal's discretion to allow a teacher to administer a corporal punishment. We hope the day will come in St. Lucia where we will not have to administer corporal punishment altogether.
I think, if I may, I only want to bring a light to the way that you asked the question. It was not our intention, nor will it be. Corporal punishment was not the center at all. Our focus was on creating or putting in place strategies to make sure that teachers are given positive behavioral management mechanisms and strategies. So I don't want it to be a situation where corporal punishment gets all the attention. We're moving to abolish corporal punishment. Our focus is on making sure that we give teachers the tools, which goes back to your first question. We're not isolating key points, which would be, quick media grabs or wonderful headlines, but yet still we arrive at nothing. Our preference would be to do a holistic approach to make sure that we develop from K to tertiary education, and we cover all angles and not just a mere isolation of one or two things. So our focus in creating the capacity within our teachers, within the environment, the educative environment, in creating an environment that is conducive to learning. And it also goes back to the other aspect of making sure that we share expertise. I think that is something that is significant, that we made a pledge that if there's expertise within the region, that we are going to facilitate the sharing of that expertise internally. As Dr. Jules mentioned, the entities, governmental related, not-for-profit, that were represented, it's not merely we were sponges facilitating the conversations, but we approach with a great degree of scrutiny, highlighting our individual national interests in a collective voice to the regional representation through the OECS. And we want that to be the emphasis of our focus.